Fantasy football season is upon us, which means it is time to draft your fantasy teams. Drafting the wrong players can make or break your fantasy season, so today we are going to look at 5 players that you should let your idiot league mates draft instead. Up first, we have James Cook, and James Cook is on pretty much everybody's list, and I think that's for good reason. He was the RB8 in 2024. A lot of that had to do with how many touchdowns he scored, 18 total. This is a drastic change from the 9 that he scored between his first 2 seasons. He's essentially tripled his overall touchdown score. So I expect a heavy regression coming from James Cook. On top of that, he's currently in contract talks with the Bills. He's not very happy with his contract. He wants an extension, and he wants to get paid. He's been very vocal about that. He's been very vocal about, saying, hey, I need my money. I need to get, paid what I feel like I'm worth. So it's always good to keep an eye on that because you don't even know what's going to happen with that. Are the Bills going to extend him? What's going to happen? You don't really know. He is going between RB12 and RB15 depending on the app that you're using. And that's just a little rich for my blood. He's going ahead of guys that I would much rather have, like Alvin Kamara, like Kenneth Walker, like Kyron Williams. I feel like he is going to be worse this year than all of them. Sleeping on Kamara, you're sleeping on Walker, you're sleeping on Kyron Williams, clearly. And on top of that, Ray Davis, he looked really good last year when James Cook didn't play. I expect him to get a larger share of the carries, and especially if the Bills don't want to pay James Cook, expect him to get a lot more carries. They're going to treat this situation very delicately, but also if James Cook doesn't want to play for them, he's not going to play for them. So I expect him to regress just overall, whether he plays or not. On top of that, I don't like the contract situation. I'd much rather have, 5 or 6 other guys that go all around him. So I'm going to go ahead and avoid him. I think that you should too. It doesn't make for a great fantasy year. I'm honestly kind of expecting him to be, outside the top 16. That's my bold take, but we'll see what happens. I would avoid him, and keep moving. All right, up next at number 2, we have Ashton Ganti, and this has to come as a shock to pretty much everybody in the internet space. I don't want anything to do with Ashton Ganti, and that has nothing to do with the player that he is. It has everything to do with the situation that he's in with the Raiders, but also the fact that he's going at RB5, that's just a little too rich for my blood. I look at the guys behind him, Derrick Henry, much rather have Jonathan Taylor, I'd much rather have Devon Achane, I'd much rather have Bucky Irving. I'd contemplate Josh Jacobs, I'd probably rather have. It has nothing to do with who he is as a player. It has everything to do with the Raiders, being kind of in that rebuild mode. Yes, they signed Geno Smith. Yes, they have Pete Carroll. Yes, they have Chip Kelly. And yes, they want to run the ball more. That was a given. I expect that to happen. But you have to remember that the Raiders aren't a very good football team yet. Maybe next year he might cook. But having anything worse than RB5 and drafting Ashton Ganti in that position, you've overspent. You've already lost. So, yes, he could be top 10. He could be 10th, 9th. But if you spent a top 5 pick on him, you're going to be disappointed in my mind. I'd rather not take that risk. I'd rather spend my pick on a more established player, somebody that I can trust. A guy like Derrick Henry, who I can entrust to be a fantasy producer. He gets added to an O-line last year that was ranked 22nd in the run. Had a poor block win rate last year, ranked 21st in running back yards per rush before contact. So they just weren't really good at running the ball altogether. And I don't expect the Raiders to be much better this year quite yet. Yes, they might win a few more games, but I think it's going to take a little bit longer to figure everything out. and I think Ashton Ganti is going to suffer from that. So I would avoid him. He shouldn't be top 5 RBs as a rookie. That's way too much of an overspend. Let your league mates draft him instead. Trust me. Up next at third, we have Puka Nakua, who is currently going as the wide receiver, number 4 on Underdog. That's a little bit rich. Just like Ashton Ganti, that's a little bit rich for my blood. He's going ahead of, at least 5 guys that I'd rather have ahead of him. Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brian Thomas, Drake London. All of those guys I feel like aren't going to be fighting for the same type of target share that Puka is with Devontae Adams. On top of that, he has, a strong injury concern. He has multiple knee issues that have made him miss games both in college and in the NFL. Broken foot, ankle injury. Stafford is also hurt. He's dealing with a back problem, age 37. If Stafford doesn't play, I feel like his value diminishes even further because Jimmy Garoppolo, speaking as a Niners fan, is not the answer to get your receivers the ball. I'm just going to put that out there. On top of that, in his first 2 seasons in the NFL, he's only scored 9 touchdowns. So he hasn't been too crazy on the touchdown game, despite doing very well over his first 2 years. It's going to be much more difficult this year, I feel, with Cooper Kupp gone. I think that it's going to be a lot more difficult for him, a lot more challenging. And his league high last year of 39.1% target share is just unsustainable. It's not going to work long term. He's definitely not going to have that this year. So you can't expect him to be the same type of producer. All of these things added up. It's just better to avoid him. There are other better options around the same pick. He goes overall at pick number 8. You can grab any one of those guys that I mentioned instead of him, and I think that you'll be much happier. Just avoid him. He doesn't need to be in the top 5. Just my opinion. But we'll see how he does. Up next at pick number 4, you guys have seen it with Ganti, you've seen it with Puka. Brock Bowers is also on my avoid list. He broke the rookie reception record last year, 153 targets, 112 receptions. He only finished 30 points ahead of Kittle, who had over 50 less targets than he did. It says something about the tight end position, and this is what makes tight end really difficult. Because, Bowers had a great year. He was phenomenal. It was, quite possibly the best receiving performance of a rookie in NFL history, and especially by a tight end. However, you don't really want to see yourself spending a 2nd-round pick on a tight end because they just don't score that many points compared to the guys that are going, rounds way later. He's currently going 2nd round in drafts, and I feel like you can find much better, late value in Kittle, who's going in the 3rd, Hawkinson, Kelsey, Ingram, Laporta, who are all going way, way later than Brock Bowers, and I feel like will only score, 50 points less? So if you invest in a better receiver, somebody who goes around the same round as Brock Bowers, somebody like, I'm looking here, somebody like Ladd McConkey, somebody like Jonathan Taylor, somebody like T. Higgins. These are guys who could all potentially score much more points than Brock Bowers. On top of that, Pete Carroll wants to focus on the run. I said that with Ashton Ganti. He does want to run the ball more often, which kind of leads the Raiders into this catch-22. And it makes me feel, some type of way because I know that Ashton Ganti is going to get a large workload. And that's going to reduce Brock Bowers' value. I just don't trust this offense. I don't trust an offense with Pete Carroll, and Chip Kelly at the offensive helm. This is a team that is still coming together, still trying to figure it out. These two have a history of not really using their tight ends. Chip Kelly kind of had Zach Ertz, but they don't really use their tight ends all that much. I don't want to expect the same type of production and be disappointed, but I also don't want to spend a second round pick when I can get the same amount of points, 5 rounds down the line. So for me, Brock Bowers is an overpay. I don't want him, and I feel like you guys should also avoid him in favor of another running back or wide receiver. And last but not least, we have Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is purely for the fact that he is on the Ravens. This is a team that throws less than 31 passes per game. In the NFL's entire history, there have only been 18 wide receivers who have ever finished as wide receiver 24 or better under this metric. This is an offense that ran 53% of the time last year and just added guys like DeAndre Hopkins. Granted, a little bit older, but he should take some targets away from Zay Flowers, who has never been above 12.9 fantasy points per game in his 2 years. On average, in the first 2 years, that never above that average, and only one receiver has been above 14 points per game since Lamar has been the quarterback, and that came in 2021, and that was Marquise Brown. So Lamar doesn't have a great history with his wide receivers, being fantasy producers. This is a guy that did make the Pro Bowl last year, but he was very disappointing from a fantasy perspective. There were, weeks where he would just absolutely disappear. And that's not because of necessarily who he is, but that's because of who the Ravens are and how successful they are running the ball. You don't need to throw the ball that much when the ground game is working. On top of that, you look at the other guys that are going around the same range as Zay Flowers, and I see a couple guys that I would much rather have over him. Jerry Jeudy, Jacoby Myers, and Calvin Ridley being 3 of them. I feel like they are all in better situations where they're going to get the ball just as many times, if not more targets, than Zay Flowers will. And add that in with Lamar and Derrick Henry being just beasts on the ground. I don't want any part in this receiver core. I haven't ever wanted any part of it. But I do think that you guys need to avoid Zay Flowers. It's not worth the risk. And that's going to do it for me. If you guys like this video and you guys want to see more videos like that, make sure that you smash that subscribe button, comment, turn on those notifications, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.